Hi, and welcome back to Grassroots Crypto, where I like to teach people about crypto. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the concerns or points that have been raised regarding THORFi. THORFi is you could say, hotly debated item at the moment. So you may be reading the dev Discord, seeing Twitter threads, or listened to Twitter Spaces and heard a lot of people talking about some of the risk and issues and popping up concerns around THORFi, specifically introducing the POL or the protocol owned liquidity portion, as well as the lending. So I've read all these, and it's often just a big wall of text, very long threads, a lot of people talking, and it's complicated stuff, and it's not easy to follow or understand because the system is not easy and simple and stuff like that to understand. To me, over the last few months, it feels like it's been the same conversation about the same issue and usually ends up in the same unresolved state, and then usually the same conversation starts up next week. So I wanted to take the time to detail each concern and how they may interact with each other. So if we can understand that, then we might have better conversations around the likelihood of these actual concerns or risk happening. As a disclaimer, this video is designed to articulate and demonstrate these concerns, and it is in no way to be a judgment of these features or to be taken advice in any way. So I'm going to be demonstrating these concerns in a deliberately bad market and network situations to demonstrate the concerns. Some of these situations may never happen or have not happened previously, so take that with a pinch of salt. In these fictitious, unrealistic, arguably impossible scenarios I will create are for teaching purposes only, and it's up to you to work out the likelihood of any of these ever happening, given the market history and inbuilt network or proposed network features and security within the network. Lastly, this is not a comprehensive look at THORFi. I have other videos for that. You can go look at them here. Without further delay, let's get started. Okay, so number one, we're going to be starting with the synthetic, the Savers, as well as POL, which is protocol owned liquidity. So this is the general pitch that I've been having for a pool. You have a synth part, the synth utilization, and the current cap is 30%, and then you have a liquidity provider section. Actually, sorry, this here is probably, let's say it's 70%. And you can't add any more synths beyond this cap. And this really only applies to the BTC pools. So if we were to go have a quick look at here, we can see that the savers or the synths cap, like however you want to say it, is 98%. So it's 98% of the 30%, is we could say here. So that's that utilization at 30%, which means that part's full. And as you can see, the other ones, like the other assets, like Ethereum and stuff like that, like it's not even approaching anywhere near it. I think Savers for Ethereum here is at 50 or again at 60%. So what we're seeing is like the main issue, the main contention around this is just the BTC pool. So whilst I'm going to focus on BTC pool, understand that it is other places as well. So the synth cap is at 30%. There's a proposal to move it to 50%, which means that would be allowed to go up to here, and then this is more room for more savers to be added. So essentially more of this over here. Then with POL, like once this cap gets hit, then POL, it's like the cap -5 would come along and expand the pool. And let's just show what that means. So with the current cap, and I'm going to just draw this differently so people can kind of articulate a bit better. So if I have a look at the pool with the synth at 30% cap, when the actual pool increases because of gains and swaps and earnings and stuff like that, then that's great. It actually allows more room for more of this. So more synths to be minted for more savers and stuff like that for the BTC. And this obviously, as this increases, this 30% really becomes like 28, 25 or whatever. So pool growth is good because it naturally allows for more savers to come into this part here. When the pool contracts, it's the opposite in that the cap has been exceeded, and then this difference, this liquidity difference, needs to be taken from liquidity providers because synths don't incur impermanent loss. So liquidity providers do lose out here. So that's the current situation. That's how things are working now. So if we increase the cap to 50%, then that squeezing of liquidity providers is more pronounced. It happens to more of a degree. They actually get more benefit and they also incur more loss. So when when this is increased, when everything increases, they're getting like, you know, double benefit and stuff like that. But in the I guess you could say the reverse situation, when this were to happen, then they're also getting squeezed heaps because liquidity from here needs to be taken to honor the synth liquidity, the synth collateral. And then of course, more of this can't happen. So the raising of the cap amplifies the negative effect to liquidity providers. And then that's why I guess liquidity providers are seeing more of a sophisticated investor part more than a retail part now to become like a symmetrical liquidity provider. To get around this particular issue, because this cap's going to get hit all the time. Before I talk about that, the concern is if this contracts enough, you know, goes down like that, which is like probably completely unrealistic, that the actual synth utilization becomes more than the depth of the pool. So, which is bad. There are mechanisms to counter this, and this is utilizing POL. And again, you can see my previous video for more information. But essentially, what happens here is to allow for more space here, the POL trigger, which is going to be the cap amount minus 5%, at least in the proposed design, that is going to go ahead, the reserve goes ahead and pumps this particular part of the pool in order for it to grow. So then this particular part happens. So as the POL pumps the liquidity provider section, forgive my technical language, then this happens. Everything rises and then allows for the synth utilization it allows more room for more savers. So it allows for more of this to happen. And then if this was to, you know, go down to 40%, then obviously this can then contract back down, as in like the THORChain reserve can withdraw liquidity to bring this back down as required. So it's always moving up and down in response to where this POL trigger is. The main point here is that one, liquidity providers have obviously taken on the risk in a negative situation, and two, the reserve is pumping this liquidity provider section in order to allow room for more of this to happen. And it's got a lot of reserve. It's got like 140 million RUNE there or whatever. So then it's like, well, is that the best utilization of the THORChain reserve? That can get squeezed. It can, you know, it's not going to be an issue in the next, you know, month, 3 months, 6 months, year, or whatever. But there can be a situation where a lot of capital's gone in there into this part to pump it up, and then massive impairment loss happens, in which case the THORChain reserve is getting creamed because of the impairment loss, because it's deployed a lot of capital to here to pump it up. You know, under what circumstances that would happen, is that realistic? What's that going to happen? I'm not going to comment. I'm just saying this is the concern with regards to the THORChain reserve. And the THORChain reserve also pays the block rewards and stuff like that. It earns income through the network fees. So it hasn't got huge amounts of income. It's there to sustain the protocol over a long time. So taking a large amount or risking a large amount is a concern. When we talk about impermanent loss, there's like a good one here. You can go to 180 days as well with regards to how much impermanent loss happens on the BTC pool. And this becomes more important when we talk about like negative implications for liquidity providers or the POL when it's actually in as an LP for them inside of a pool. And you can go and have a look at any of the Savers pools within this graph to get your own information. The longer the time period, the better, because that's more what the network's playing on rather than short-term LPs. So next I wanted to go onto lending, which is a touch more complex. If you can give me a bit of latitude, I'm going to try and heavily simplify this in order to focus on the main points. But this is not accurate. The numbers are kind of like to be taken with a pinch of salt, but they're for demonstration purposes only. And again, I'm going for like a bad situation only, not at all addressing the positives which this could potentially give. So again, articulating concerns, not trying to demonstrate the system as a whole. So if we have a borrower and deposits 2 BTC at a collateralization of 200%, and again, likely it's going to be like 800% or higher, or whatever. 200%, I'm not saying is going to be realistic or indicative of what you're going to get. Anyway, they get about 1 BTC worth of tether. Now, in my example, BTC is worth 20 grand. So they're depositing 40 grand worth of collateral, and they're taking about 20 grand worth of debt. So the price of runes is $1.25. and the pool ratio. And I can't emphasize how important pool ratio is in THORChain. Prices are relevant. Pool ratio is relevant. It's 16,000 RUNE to 1 BTC. They go ahead and they've got their tether and they do whatever they want to do with it. If you want to have a look at the actual numbers, I've got them here, and you can go through all the specific details here or watch my video. I don't want to go through those details. Just to summarize, that 32,000 RUNE is burnt because this collateral was burnt through the process, and about 20,000 tether is actually, this is the debt that's minted. They've got 40,000 worth of collateral and they get $20,000 worth of tether. So some time passes, prices change. So what we're looking to do is to have a really poor situation for RUNE. So where BTC's doubled and RUNE hasn't changed. You could actually do it on the flip side where BTC is actually worth the same and RUNE's halved. It doesn't actually matter which way you go. Either way, the pool ratio has changed. And what we're looking to do is 1 BD, instead of having, I've actually got it down here, 1 BTC will buy 16,000 RUNE or vice versa. We're actually going to make it worse, like doubly worse. So 2 BTC will buy 64,000 or 1 BTC will buy 32. So this ratio is what's important here. So it was 16 and now it's 32, or half a BTC will be buying the same amount of RUNE as it did previously. You know, maybe years passed, some magic times passed, and this magic ratio has appeared. 1 BTC buys 32,000 instead of 16,000 that it did before. So this borrower then, after this magic price change has occurred, and this ratio change has happened, this borrower comes along with this 20,000 tether and pays off the debt. And it didn't pay any slip or have any penalties doing that. It was magically done. And then the actual BTC is then returned to them because they paid off all their collateral, was returned to them because they paid off the loan. So the borrower gets their Bitcoin back. The borrower doesn't care. Like in both situations, the borrower's like, yippee yahoo, I got a loan with 0 interest, 0 liquidations, and no expiry. So yippee yahoo, they don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So from a borrower's point of view, this is like awesome. So the debt of 20,000 USDT, we don't want USD, is paid. And 64,000 RUNE is minted in order to release the BTC collateral. So if you can remember, 32 was burnt for the collateral and 64,000 was actually now minted. So twice the amount of RUNE is minted to release the collateral than was burnt. So there's actually a net increase of RUNE through this debt life cycle. You can see 32 RUNE is burnt, 64 is minted. When we go along and you can look at this, and this has got the normal numbers in it, hasn't got the worst case scenario. Really, it's here and here. So what I'm saying is 32,000 RUNE was burnt when the loan was created, and then 64,000 was actually minted when the loan was closed. So these are the two numbers I'm focusing on because this is what's important. All the other numbers around these two pictures are quite, they're important, but they're nowhere near as important as those particular numbers. They're the most significant numbers in the opening and closing to determine a net RUNE increase or decrease, a supply increase or decrease throughout the loan. So thus twice the amount of RUNE is minted than burnt. So we have a net increase of RUNE. Lending is designed to increase the price of RUNE and increase the demand of RUNE. So here we're having a supply increase of RUNE, which is kind of like the opposite of the desired effect. There's a limit to this because there's a total supply of RUNE, and I think there's about 15 million RUNE in play, as in before it hits the total supply because of stuff that's happened. Not going to go into it. But if there's too much of supply that gets created, too much minting that happens, then there's a circuit breaker, and when that kicks in, there's no more minting to go, and the reserve will be the ultimate backstop if that circuit breaker kicks in. You can see my video on lending for more information on that. So here, if this were to happen like lots and lots of times, you would need, I don't know, 15 million divided 32,000 amount of times, then the reserve would kick in when the circuit breaker kicks in order to ensure that the supply cap of RUNE, the 500 million, wouldn't be exceeded. So that's lending. The main concern here is more is minted on close than minted when on open. That's essentially the because of bad price movements that go against the pool ratio, that make the pool ratio worse. Then when we have savers and lending, Well, I want to make this really clear that savers and lending are two separate mechanisms. They are not related to each other. They work independently. That's why savers is able to be introduced independent of lending. And to be honest, lending could have been introduced without savers. They're really separate mechanisms, and I just want to make that really clear. However, because they're within the same system, you can combine them and then have some interesting effects. So continuing with our little fantastic fictitious scenario, we're going to throw Ethereum in here. So we have our 2BTC, we put that through at a 200% collateralization ratio. Again, not realistic, but we'll do that. And then we're going to put that into Ethereum. We have to put that into a gas asset for us for this scenario to work. So then we take this Ethereum that we've just borrowed, because, and I did look it up, you get like nearly 15 Ethereum for 2BTC at the moment. So I did 7.5 at 200% collateralization. I take this Ethereum and then I'll put this into the Ethereum's Savers vault where I can earn a yield and things are great. Some time passes and we have the same thing where the price of Rune halves in comparison to Bitcoin and Ethereum at the same time. Amazing. Or Bitcoin and Ethereum doubles and the Rune price doesn't stay the same. Again, we're looking for that. We're looking for that ratio change. We don't actually care what the price is. So then we go ahead and we take our gains. It's just we made 0.2 of an Ethereum gains, which we pocket, and then we pay off our debt with our Ethereum that we've got back from the savers, and to get our BTC back. So from a end user point of view, this is what they look like. Things are great. From a THORChain or a Rune point of view, we're having the situation where we've minted double the amount of Rune because of this loan. We're essentially replicating the same loan cycle here. And we are taking this scenario within the Ethereum pool, and we're saying that a huge amount of impermanent loss has occurred that's contracted the pool. And the Ethereum liquidity providers are losing out heavily in this particular scenario. So the reserve is going to be copying it here, particularly if it had a lot in order to lift the cap within Ethereum. And the supply of Rune has increased because a person has decided to combine the services of saving and lending. So we've amplified the issue, you could say, across two pools, the BTC pool for lending and then the Ethereum pool for savers. So that's what that picture is trying to depict. That's kind of the concern of putting particularly the POL part into savers, increasing the cap, and then the lending part when lending goes south, when essentially this part on the loan close becomes much larger than the loan, or the number when the loan was taken out. So that's a look at savers as well as lending, going through the concerns. So as a bit of a summary, obviously the LPs and reserve could lose out in a negative situation to provide room for savers. The LPs and reserve take on additional risk as the cap is raised, which we've discussed. The cap can potentially always be hit, so there's always a need for POL, and the reserve is limited. Whilst it does gain income from the capital is deployed, because it's an LP as well, that may be less than the IL that it incurs, potentially, maybe. Then we'll go lending. As we talked about, more Rune is minted when the loan is closed than it was opened, so it's going to be inflationary instead of deflationary. And then you can combine them both to have a more compounding effect in a negative scenario. Some things to consider with this video is that I've provided a very basic example using very simple numbers to teach you these concerns so you can understand them and how they relate to the different aspects. But reality is not so simple. There's a lot of nuance there, and you need to think about the network and market behavior and conditions to really kind of understand it. If I also choose different numbers to make it like 3x price difference, so instead of going from 1 to 32,000, I went 1 to 48,000 or 84,000, something like much worse, then that would, instead of doing a 2x, or if I was to change the collateralization ratio for lending, that would have a significant change on the inflationary or deflationary pressures of lending, of the outcome. So the relationship between the inputs and the outcome is not linear. It doesn't go up in a straight line. It can compound. It can go up exponentially, up or down, depending on what happens. Will depend on whether it's a better outcome or a worse outcome. So some of these other things that are worth considering, and this is based off some feedback that I got after I did a bit of a draft video. The reserve is selling Rune into the pools to backstop the synths, and we talked about this. But what's actually happening is that causes the Rune price to go down, because when the reserve asymmetrically adds, it's adding 100% Rune, and then that will cause an imbalance in the pool. So we've added all this Rune, we've taken it from balance and we've added it all. So then the Rune is going to be at a discount and BTC is going to be selling at a premium. So this reduces the price of Rune inside the pool when this occurs. Obviously ours will balance this out, but at the time, the Rune price in the pool is going to be selling at a discount. As it says here, this causes the price of Rune to decrease due to selling pressure due to the asymmetrical addition. So the next point, the amount of Rune that will be burnt from the reserve for borrowers to exit is ever increasing. And another way of saying this is this increases the potential liability for the reserve if the circuit breaker is hit. If we just try and translate that a bit, if lending really goes south and heaps of Rune got minted, so in our example, 32,000 more Rune got minted, if this turned into an extra 15 million Rune that got minted, the circuit breaker will get hit to protect the supply cap. And any additional minting that is required to close loans would need to come from the reserve. So the reserve would have that liability. But you don't know what that liability is going to be until you know when the circuit breakers hit and what the prices are of all the assets at the time. Then you'll know the potential liability for the reserve. Either way, that potential and unknown and uncalculatable liability is potentially there when loans are opened. So that's what that point is trying to say. And then the last one is essentially saying that the reserve issues block rewards, and about 66% of earnings that go to liquidity providers, node operators, and savers comes from block rewards. And the block reward is determined on the size of the reserve. So if you have a large reserve, you have a lot of block rewards. If you have a small reserve, you don't have as many block rewards. So if the reserve's deploying all this liquidity to backstop the saves, to add to POL and stuff like that, and then potentially if lending goes south and the circuit breaker is hit, it has to deploy a lot more to cover the minting, then that shrinks or reduces the size of the reserve, which would reduce the earnings for all the network participants. So yeah, if lending particularly goes south, it will affect the network in its entirety because the reserve is reduced. Lastly, you do want to consider, and like with any new feature, this is the same when Synth was introduced and anything else, new features, new code introduces complexity and possible bugs that can result potentially in exploits and downtime. As we saw an issue just a couple of weeks ago that resulted in network downtime. And this is the case for any software. It's not specific to THORChain or to crypto or anything like that. But you know, nothing comes for free. There's always risks and trade-offs. Before we go, I've got some questions for you. And I want you to put your answers in the comment section below, as I really want to get your opinion, your feedback, and your thought process on these things. So do you agree with the concerns that have been raised here? If so, why or why not? Under what conditions could the pool ratio change in the ways that I've described, or even be worse? So that instead of a 2x, a 3x, a 5x, and 8x change for the worst. So what does the market history tell you about the likelihood of these changes or scenarios happening? When has Rune traded against or in the opposite direction Bitcoin previously, and why was that the case? Lending has specific parameters, so setting the collateralization ratio at the start and a bunch of other stuff that you can read in the spec. So who should set these particular parameters? How do we know they're safe? Because you can make them quite unsafe. How do we get to a consensus on what they should be when it first launches? Given the answers to the above questions, do you think that savers with POL and lending is worth proceeding with? It's worth the risks? You know, yes or no, and why is that the case? And this is going to go to StageNet before it goes live. What do you want to see happen before it goes to StageNet? What additional analysis do you want to see? What settings do you want to see happen? What additional discussion do you want to see? What information do you want to know before you, I guess, make a decision on number 6? Or have you already made your decision? Put all the information in the comment section below. This came out very early in my time, in the morning. So I just wanted to add this one. This is the Son of Odin talking about the scaling. Take your time to read that. That answers, I think, question 3 as well. So you've already got some answers there. And it's just starting up a discussion with regards to the safety and setting the right parameters, setting a cap and stuff like that. You can read that in your own time, but I wanted to add that so you know discussions are ongoing, and I'll put a link to this particular discussion in the dev Discord in the description below. So that's it. I'm going to round off this video, this potentially controversial video, by saying that the information I provide here is to try and aid or assist beneficial, more meaningful discussion and decision making for the community as well as node operators. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you understand the risks better, and I hope it provides more meaningful discussion and decision making in the future. If you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Put all your comments and points in the comment section below. Until next time, thanks.